Have at me, brah. This is Omega 99 Nemesis here on Xbox Live playing Dark Souls 2 Scholar, the First Sin Edition for my lore play on the 7th episode. Guess what? Today we're doing more lore on items. I hope you're excited as I am, because if you are, then you have the right mindset, because this stinks. And just to clarify, it's not that I dislike doing the lore, it's just that I'm doing more lore than playing, which is starting to sap into my patience when I have to deal with various errors and load times. Alright, so let's get the Amber Herb dealt with. An annual herb with an amber color so deep it gives the impression of luminescence. Restores a small number of spell uses. It is the mistaken belief of many that the flowers of this herb do not blossom. However, small white flowers do blossom during dusk when the moon is visible. On a gameplay perspective, this item will restore a few castings of your spell. So if I use a couple castings of a spell I liked and I needed more, I could eat this, so to speak, use it, and I'd gain a few more. I think it roughly restores a quarter of your total spell uses. So if you've got 4 charges to a single spell, it'll recover 1 of them. And likewise, it applies to all your spells, so I recommend using items like these when you've really exhausted your spells. On a lore perspective, apparently this is just a mere superstition sort of thing, where apparently it's a herb that grows every year. I don't know much about flowers, so that's what I'm assuming annual herb means. And apparently everyone thinks that it doesn't blossom, that the flowers don't blossom, but it does under the dusk of a moon when it's visible. So with that in mind, it kind of ties into the fact that sorceries are connected to the moon and so forth, as in Dark Souls 1, there was a lot of connections between crystals, the moon, and sorcery in general, considering the connections between Seath the Scaleless, Priscilla the Hybrid, and the Moonlight Butterfly. Alright, let's move on to the next item and get these items dealt with. I'd rather not go anymore. I'd like to actually get something done next episode, if at all possible. Next, the Rusted Coin, which is an item that was lost along with my original take on the Dark Sign back in episode 2 or 3. Rusted Coin. An old rusted coin. Crushing the coin temporarily boosts luck. This rusted coin gives you that little extra bit of luck, making items and the like easier to find. The coin is engraved with the image of a god that was worshipped in ancient times, but no one knows its true origins. Alright, so in a gameplay perspective, the Rusted Coin increases your item discovery rate by an X amount. Originally it was like by 1% in Dark Souls 2, the original version, but now I don't know, because I heard they augmented that feature. So in terms of item usage, this item is very good if you're farming for equipment by killing several of the same enemies over and over. So if you go into the Iron Keep, like the way the Elan Knights look, you can crush this item and hopefully they'll drop their equipment a little more easily. Now, on the lore side of it, I've cross-examined this with the coins from Dark Souls 1. There were 3 in total, a copper, silver, and gold coin, each representing a figure of cultural significance, but not a god. I've confirmed that this individual on the rusted coin does not resemble any of them. If you look closely, it resembles a dressed figure with wings. This leads to a couple of suspects, but also in Dark Souls 1, the coins could be traded to Frompt for souls. If you don't know who Frompt is, don't worry about it. But the rusted coin, effectively, it depicts a figure in like a dress or a gown of some sort, or just a long skirt with wings. There are no figures that were depicted in Dark Souls 1 that match this seamlessly. In this game, there is one character, a boss called the Dark Lurker, which is this angelic being who wears a robe and dress sort of outfit. I think it's possible that's who this coin is supposed to represent. I think it's the 3rd most likely option, only because there's a lack of evidence to either prove or disprove it, and because of the strong resemblance, but that's it. The 2nd most likely culprit would be Dark Sun Gwendolyn, as he was the son of Gwyn in Dark Souls 1, the Lastborn, but because of his affinity for the moon, he was raised as a daughter, and let's just say, got creepy. He had tentacles, wore a dress, and wore an over-the-top hat that even a kabuki actor would laugh at. My personal suspicion is this might be considered the object of Velka, the goddess of sin, and, karmic, not justice, I wouldn't say, but pretty much, she's basically the goddess of karma, and was a goddess before the other gods. came into power. Rather than being just a powerful entity who found a great soul, she was already great. So I think it could possibly be her because her domain was fate and karma, sin, etc. And seeing as how this is a rusted coin that boosts your luck, fortune, and so forth, which can easily be tied into fate in a certain way. Gwendolyn had the same dominions as Velka, but Velka was on an entirely other level. So that's my personal suspicion, is that it's a depiction of Velka. At least she's the most likely. Though I think the Dark Lurker is also a strong possibility. Next, the Estus Flask Shard. The shard of an Estus Flask. Shards are deeply soaked in Estus. Graft the shard to an Estus Flask to increase flask uses. Over the ages, countless souls rested their bones as they drank from the original flask, and now the shard remains, serving as a vestige of their hopes and dreams. Okay, so from a gameplay perspective, you can present these to the Emerald Herald, and she can increase the number of swigs you can take to 12, which is paltry compared to the 35 you could originally get in Dark Souls 1, but besides the point. That's beside the point. So on a lore perspective, apparently each shard is basically from the flask of another undead who effectively failed in his quest, kind of like how the Homeward Bones were what's left of them as well. I suppose if one was to think of the spirit of the undead, to graft these flasks into your shard is to take upon yourself their dreams and ambitions. So for example, if Lux ever took the shard of another undead, maybe with one with his own story, that undead's story would be part of Lux's, by extension. But regardless, this shard will no doubt belong to the undead who just keeled over on top of the well at random. You know, like most of us often do. Okay, next thing. Next, the Soul of a Lost Undead. Soul of a Lost Undead who has long ago gone hollow. Used to acquire souls. The soul is the source of all life, and even in undeath or hollowing, the mind seeks souls. So I would equate this to being the soul of all but the weakest of hollows, specifically like the hollowed infantry you find in things betwixt and in the Forest of Fallen Giants. You can expend this soul to acquire 200 souls per Soul of a Lost Undead you use. From a lore perspective, the best way to look at this is that it's an item that it is basically, on the lore, it says something interesting, the soul is the source of all life, and remember that Soldan said that the curse can be traced to the soul, and that the undead will never die. So perhaps the reason that hollows seek souls is possibly because subconsciously they're hunting a way to cure themselves, as we know that souls are what effectively made hollows into humans, at least if you have pre-existing knowledge of the lore. But on a side note, actually, that's really all there is to say about this and the next item. I'm even going to just go ahead and cut to the next one in this clip, with the large Soul of a Lost Undead probably being equivalent to the weakest of the undead soldiers you find at the Forest of Fallen Giants, and maybe even some of the very weak of the hollows you fight at the Lost Bastille. Alright, so I'm going to just go ahead and skip the next size of the Lost Undead, which is just the large Soul of a Lost Undead, which just gives you 400 souls as opposed to 200. Alright, next the Cracked Red Eye Orb. Cracked Red Eye Orb, online play item, invade other worlds. Defeat the master of the world you have invaded to acquire a token of spite. The residual sins of those who have succumbed to dark temptations are contained in the form of the Cracked Red Eye Orb. In a gameplay perspective, this allows you to invade other players for specific benefits, such as a token of spite and a handful of souls. Also, if you succeed in invading and killing the host, you also return to your world as a human. If you were hollowed at some point, this allows you to restore your humanity, enable co-op, and other online functions. Now, from a lore perspective, it states that the sins of the people who succumb to the dark temptations is manifested by the Red Eye Orb, and also note that the Red Eye Orb itself originally belonged to the Dark Wraiths of Koth in Dark Souls 1. So this could just be a hand-me-down from Koth after countless ages have passed, but honestly all I'm going to do is say that in a retrospect, this is probably something that once belonged to the Dark Wraiths. Alright, so we're going to skip a few items and backtrack there. I apologize, a bit of memory issue. So, okay, now we're on the dagger. A standard dagger has only modest attack and short reach, but can be jabbed in rapid succession. With a powerful critical attack, this is a potent weapon in the hands of the capable. So this also ties into my argument that, first off, this weapon is definitely better than a lot of others you can get of the same weight class. More importantly, this is also ties into my argument that the short sword does have a place in good hands. So let me put it this way, if you can use this weapon to deadly efficiency, then yes, the short sword isn't that bad of a weapon either. But aside from that, the dagger's a pretty good weapon and pretty lethal in a dex build like mine, especially if I'm learning to dual wield. But we'll get to that shortly. Alright, next up. Alright, now the Morningstar, a club fitted with a spiked head. The spikes of this blunt weapon causes bleeding. Normally wielded by clerics, but clearly intended to draw blood. You know, you could seriously make a very interesting quip about politics, but I can't find it. Alright, so the Morningstar is a very useful weapon early on, and evidently far more superior than the crappy mace you get for the cleric, although mace probably isn't that bad. It's just that when you compare it to this, which causes bleeding, actually it's the only hammer that does that. It is an incredibly effective weapon early in the game, and likewise, if you need a lightweight striking weapon, this is a very good place to start. Likewise, there's a boss coming up that I may or may not decide to bring out the Morningstar for, but just keep this weapon in mind when you start out, because this is a good weapon to start with. Alright then. The binoculars. Binoculars are used as peer at distance sights, equipped in place of a weapon to use. A rare tool crafted in Vulcan. These won't help you in battle, but with a little creativity can be put to good use. I sort of disagree with that last line, but only to an extent. Alright, so if you equip these in your weapon slot, or shield slot, depending on how you play, you can use these to zoom in, kind of like what you do with a bow, though I believe you get a bit more distance with the binoculars. This allows you to observe enemy movements and so forth, and if you're getting invaded and you don't know where he is, it's a good way to see if he's in a distance. Also, I've heard of creative things, yes, definitely being used, either by hackers or people using mods on the PC, such as using the binoculars to play first person throughout the game, which is actually very interesting. However, I cannot properly recommend this for anyone trying to win. Next is the Cleric Sacred Chime. This is the chime you get if you start off as the Cleric class. Yeesh, tongue twister. Cleric Sacred Chime. Most clerics receive this as their first sacred chime, a catalyst for miracles and hexes. To use miracles, equip a sacred chime and attune a miracle at a bonfire or hex. The strength of most miracles is affected by the caster's faith, and hexes by faith and intelligence. Alright, so like I said, this just shows how meaningless it would be to start off as the Cleric class, because first off, you get an improved version of the starting weapon as well as the first Cleric's Chime, literally in Majula. And in exchange for that, you get one piece of chest armor that you have to go a little further to get, and no helmet, gloves, or boots, so, you know, not really worth it. Now then, with that out of the way, the Cleric's Sacred Chime, I recall, is not that hot. It's okay for now. But you're going to want to trade this for a more effective chime later on. And that's really all there is. There's nothing really to talk about, except the fact that in Dark Souls 1, I like theirs better because they use these weird little totem wand things. That I just liked them better. The bells seem a bit much, but it's harmless. Alright, next is the actually, not finally, but almost finally, the Blue Seal. Ring of the Way of Blue Covenant. Increases HP slightly. The Way of Blue is not a developed religion, it is a humble prayer that's spread naturally amongst those seeking help. When apostles of blue are invaded by dark spirits, they can receive assistance from masters of other worlds. So, okay, a couple things to tackle. On a gameplay perspective, all this ring really does is add a bit to your max HP, which can be used to offshoot the effects of hollowing. Now, if you're part of the Way of Blue Covenant, if you're invaded by another player who uses the cracked red eye orb or etc., a certain covenant that I'll get into later will send members to back you up. There are other players who will help you fend off the invader. However, do not count on receiving aid. but you do not need to wear this ring to receive the protection this covenant offers. Aside from that, on a lore side of things, it sounds to me like this group developed off of another covenant from the original game, or as an offshoot of some sort. I will go into this a bit more once we get into the Hyde's Tower of Flame area, as that's where a lot of lore and conjecture is going to take place, but I'm going to be kind enough and not just sit and look at items as I do so. I'll actually be fighting and doing stuff and trying to prove a point. Because, you know, I'm kind of sick and tired of just standing here and talking about stuff. And now the last item to close out this episode would be the Titanite Shard. Titanite Shard. Titanite Shard used to reinforce equipment. Reinforces equipment up to +3. Titanite was discovered in an ancient layer of Earth and is said to be a gift of the gods. Titanite of this size has very little power, but is still a rare find. Alright, so in terms of Titanite Shards, you use these to upgrade regular equipment. You know, stuff that's not boss or specifically legendary in nature. Now, Titanite Shards will only upgrade equipment to a certain point, up to an amateur level. Trust me when I say you're going to move on to a different kind of Titanite when you want to upgrade stuff. And before you say anything, it was a lot more complicated in Dark Souls 1, but I dare say it was also more thought out, which I really liked. But they streamlined a lot of stuff in Dark Souls 2, and though I didn't think streamlining the upgrade paths in this game was necessary, I think it is a harmless addition, one that may deprive a bit of enjoyment out of the customizations, but not that much. Alright, this concludes episode 7. This is Omega 99 Nemesis signing out and saying, remember when I said this would be the last of the lore for a while?